Hi.
Hi. It is my great pleasure to introduce you to Stuart McCowan. Thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Stuart has a fascinating career. Growing up in Fife in Scotland, you started your career in radio, and since then you worked in all areas of post-production sound. As a sound supervisor and sound editor, you've worked on some of the biggest, highest grossing box office hits of all time, including Avatar, Finding Nemo, and Star Trek Into Darkness. You won an Emmy this year for your work on Sherlock, and a Golden Reel Award for your work on Super 8 and The Curious Case of Benjamin Button previously. Also, you're one of the few people from the UK who is working still at George Lucas's Skywalker Sound in California. So, to begin, could you please tell us how it all began and what brought you into sound?
I was thinking about that earlier with the other speakers. I don't remember an actual event that was like, this is what I want to do. I always had a passion for film, loved that. Loved going to the cinema when I was a kid. But it was at a time, I was I was born in the 70s, but I'm a child of the 80s, and it was at a time where there wasn't a lot of, at least from my point of view, British film. So going to America and working over there was, complete fantasy. But I played around with sound when I was in primary school with a tape recorder. I found that when you're in record and you have the play button halfway down, it'll speed the tape up. So then when you played it back at normal speed, everything was really slow. So playing around with that, and then getting a microphone, and obviously it's illegal, but recording things off television and film. So even the first 3 Star Wars films I actually had on audio cassette. So I knew them better audibly, or by sound, than I did picture. And that was probably a very big influence in terms of, when I would replay those films in my head, it was a story of sound, really, But getting into it, it was radio and the BBC seemed more realistic. And during high school, it was at a time, again, maybe it's the same, where career officers they don't talk to you about what you're passionate about. They just look at your grades and think, well, this is what you should do. So it came down to wanting to be a police officer or join the RAF. I kid you not, seriously. And I ended up doing a sports degree, of all things. But that college that I was at had, and at the time, I think it was one of 3 or 4 in the whole of the UK, a broadcasting course. So I applied for that, and it was one of 12 places, and so I came out of it with a radio and television degree, broadcasting degree, and then got into radio.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And then you moved to the US, where your radio career continued.
Well, yeah, it did. I was a couple of years in the BBC, and it was at a time where things were changing, and I didn't quite like. It wasn't the company I thought it was going to be. Growing up and thinking it was this giant of broadcasting, which it is, but it was changing the way it made programs, and I wasn't too happy with it, and I was getting pigeonholed into areas I didn't like. So I thought, why not? Let's just go to the States. I was young enough, and I was lucky to get picked up at a brand new station in Northern California, and only because I had BBC on my CV, and I've never worked in the newsroom before. I did topical programming and entertainment programming. They made me news director. Wow. Well, they asked if I wanted to be, and I wasn't going to say no. So I did that. But then I was involved a lot with production, as well as being on air and doing a morning show. I was involved, in fact, director of the production of the sound of the studio, the sound of the station. And that was great. Because I love the creative side of things. It was fun playing around for 3 hours on air in the morning, with 2 good friends, but then to sit in a studio and play with sound was much more enjoyable. Yeah.
Brilliant. And then you met the legendary sound designer Randy Thom.
This was at a time where, again, the radio station was going through change. It was actually being sold, and we knew we were all going to get let go. So it was kind of the kick up the ass I needed to kind of like, okay, if I'm going to do film, there's no better time to do it now, since I knew Skywalker was, you know, on my doorstep. So I posted on what was then news groups, on a film sound news group that Randy frequented often. I was very honest. I said I had no film experience, but I have all this sound audio experience, both digital and analog. And we met for coffee. He contacted me and we met for coffee. He never even looked really at the CV. He never listened to the little demo tape that I sent him. Because later, it was about 6 months later, I was doing some stuff, some filing stuff in his office, and there was the sealed envelope. He'd never even opened it. No way. But he had a similar background. He worked in radio as well before getting into film. So I think there was a slight connection there. And he said that, you know, well, come in, start Monday, and we'll see how it goes. If it works out, we'll hire you, and if it doesn't, we've both had an experience.
Yeah, amazing.
And so that was at the beginning of '99, and Iron Giant was my first project, which was, you know, I don't think I could have had a better project to start on. It was great.
A dream.
Yeah.
Wow. And yeah, so what was it like working at Skywalker? I mean, as a workplace.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's gorgeous. It's everything you think it is. It's not a cult. There's a lot of people that think because it's so remote and out in the wilderness and in the valleys of Northern California that it's this cult place, but it's not. It's just a beautiful collaborative environment to work in. You know, especially at the tech building at Skywalker Sound. Because everyone supports one another. There's no real competitiveness that you would get in a more freelance area. So there's a lot of sharing of information. But the funny thing is, you know, there's various names in sound that I knew growing up. Ben Burt, obviously, and Gary Rydstrom. And Ben, I'm sure people know her. He's Mr. Star Wars and Indiana Jones. And Gary's done pretty much all of Spielberg's films. And the weekend before I started at Skywalker, I was watching the Academy Awards, and Gary won for Saving Private Ryan. And the very next day, Monday, I'm sitting having lunch. Randy says, let's go for lunch. And Gary Rydstrom sits down, and I'm like, you know, what's going on? Yeah. I'm from Scotland, and this shouldn't be... I mean, I was more starstruck by Gary than probably any director that I've met, and it was just great. And it's just a very welcome, it's very family-based, you know, it's great.
Yeah, sounds lovely.
Yeah.
Yes, well, we know that's Skywalker. I mean, you worked on so many huge films. Should we have a look at some
This is just, these are clips that Skywalker sent over for me to play today. So on these films, sometimes it's sound effects I've done, sometimes it's dialogue or ADR, but here's a few clips.
Very impressive.
It's not just me. There's a whole team behind all that, you know.
Looping the jumbo jets, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I was going to continue by asking you the process of working on a film like this. How does it start? How does the team get together and plan the whole thing?
Usually, I mean, it varies from project to project, but usually the supervisor, and if there's a sound designer, because there isn't always, but they'll meet with the director and the picture editor and sit down in what's called a spotting session. Sometimes we get sent the script beforehand, which is great because then we can have questions during production or even suggestions during production in terms of sound. And they sit down and we just get ideas from the director and picture editor of what they're looking for. We get a chance to ask questions. I'll talk about that in more detail with Sherlock later, but some directors don't know what they want. They know what they don't like, but they don't know what they want. And so then it becomes an evolution. And Joe Kosinski, who's, I mean, I used 2 clips of his films because he is very sound-oriented. He has that in mind when he's filming, and even during the mix, he's very precise isn't the right word. he just wants the sound to be right. Other directors will be, you know, as long as it sounds good, that's fine, but he wants it to be right, you know, and especially on Tron Legacy, getting the specifics for the light cycles and the discs there, that it just had to be perfect in his mind, you know. So the process, after the spotting session, then those guys come back, we have a debrief with the crew, and effects reel, you know, the effects editors will be assigned reels, because we still work in, even though it's almost antiquated now, we still work in reels, even though it's digital medium mainly. And depending if it's a very effects-heavy film, then the reels will be divided up between the 2, 3, sometimes 4 effects editors. And then with dialogue, again, if it's dialogue-heavy, there will be maybe 2 dialogue editors, and they'll take odd and even reels respectively. And then we just keep going, you know, and communication is key between all departments, because sometimes there's crossover, you know, sometimes effects will cut like Group Walla into, you know, just a library effect or whatever into their tracks. But if there's any recognizable English, then it has to come to dialogue, and that's mainly for international stuff because of, I mean, not to get into the technicalities of that, but it's basically the M&E, where you print just the music and effects stems and any usable dialogue sounds, but not necessarily the language that the film's in, so that then the foreign departments can dub their stuff on. So yeah, I mean, it can be a very short process, depending on the film, or a very long process. For Avatar, I was on that for 52 weeks. The longest time I've ever spent on a film, which is short in terms of how long it took to make the film, but still, normally we're on a film anywhere from, say, you know, 6 weeks, if it's a small, low-budget thing, up to, you know, 3 or 4 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing. And, well, these days you work in the UK as well, the US.
Yeah.
What brought you over here, and what's the main differences that you found in approaches to sound between the countries? And
Right. What brought me over here? I was getting, I just wanted a break from living and working in the US without breaking any ties. I mean, I still work at Skywalker. I'm going back next year. I just wanted to work on more stuff. I felt a draw back to the homeland. And film over here is getting, you know, I think for a while has become really, really good. And good sound coming out of the UK as well. And just work on different projects rather than, you know, I mean, they're fun, don't get me wrong, I love them, but just work on something a little bit different. And so actually, since I've been back, the couple of films that I've worked on have been for television. And then, of course, Sherlock and what I'm working on now are for television. So that's different. I think the way film works in the UK is pretty much the same as the US, except for unions. Because the US is all unionized, and over here it's not at all, is it? Or is there a little? I don't know.
There are, but not, I mean, generally it's not at all in the same way, I think, as in the US. So that's different. I mean, the money's less. But I'm not in the business to make money. You know, if you're getting into this for fortune and glory, you're doing it for the wrong reasons. I do it because I love doing it. And I've been very lucky being back here to have worked on, you know, something like Sherlock. You know, just, it's great. So in terms of how it works for television compared to film, I mean, with Sherlock, we're generating 3 films a season, you know, because they're 90 minutes long. But we've got, you know, a sixth of the time to do it in. So it's very, that took a little bit of adjusting. And also because, you know, when I started at Skywalker, I was doing effects and sound design. And then I moved into dialogue and ADR. And I'd been doing that for so long, not that I'd forgotten how to do effects, but I had to adjust, you know, that kind of, the way you think and your approach to the film. Because there's a lot more ambiguity with effects. With dialogue, it's either you can hear it or you can't. You know, it's understandable or it's not. But with effects, there's a little bit more of that creative license, which is great. It's fantastic. So, but you have a short time to do it. You know, so that's the main difference. It's just the time. Yeah, I guess.
But you do it, you know, you work longer hours.
And team sizes, you found that's
for Sherlock,
dependent as well, I guess.
Yeah, Sherlock's it's filmed in Cardiff actually, except for some location stuff in London, and the sound team's based in Cardiff. It's through Bank Post Production, and there's Doug, who's the supervisor on the dialogue side of things. I handle effects. There's another dialogue editor, Paul McFadden, and then I have John Joyce working with me on effects. There's Foley Walker and Foley editor. So it's a very small crew to put out, like I said, a 90-minute movie. You know.
Should we have a look at some of the material you brought to show for Sherlock?
Yeah. Bearing in mind what this weekend's all about, I think Sherlock lends itself greatly to sound. In the way that Stephen Moffat and Mark Gatiss write it, they are thinking about sound. When they come for the mixes, they're very conscious of it. And the one place in particular that the show lends itself to sound is when Sherlock goes into his mind palace. And we're actually, during the spotting sessions, we're giving specific notes on like, okay, Baker Street needs to be busy here, or, you know, this gunshot or whatever. But when it comes to the Mind Palace, there's really not a lot of notes. So the one I want to show is everyone seen the last season of Sherlock? Because if not, this might give away some stuff. If anyone hasn't seen it, you might want to leave. Sherlock gets shot. And, and during this whole dying process, he's in his mind palace, as are we. So I just wanted to show how we break down the different areas during the episode. So dialogue, you'll get a little bit of Foley, and some of the effects and sound design that we did on this. And then the music, because David Arnold and, now I'm spacing on his name, but the two guys who do the music, we work with them. So often a problem with music is there's a clash. And you've got to work out who's driving the scene. Is it effects, is it dialogue, or is it music? Because each have their place, but they can't all happen at the same time. So this scene, it's about 50 seconds long, during this whole Mind Palace death scene, kind of breaks it all down, and you can see how all the elements work together, and it will finish with the final mix.
Well, I really think that really shows the amount of detail and also the purpose of each of the sections, what kind of function they serve, and also TV, how that really now the TV audiences really expect it to sound a bit like
that's interesting you say that, because we mix Sherlock in 5.1, but it's actually broadcast in stereo. And 5.1 on Blu-ray and DVD and whatnot. And the show I'm doing right now, I asked, are we going to mix it in 5.1? But no, we're mixing in stereo. But 5.1 there'll be a remix for the 5.1 for Blu-ray, which I kind of think you should work the other way. You know, mix in the widest possible. So mix in 5.1, then you can easily fold it down to stereo rather than trying to then expand it out. So yeah, I think it should be in 5.1, regardless, but that's just me.
Let's check in how we're doing for time. 5 minutes. Right. Until Q&A, yes. Because I also wanted to ask you about, because earlier today we saw how a script can then, how an idea on the page then kind of sometimes changes until actually the final product. And I know the directors you work with, especially like Spielberg and J.J. Abrams, what's their kind of approach to sound? Is it very much on the script stage? Do they add it on there? Or?
Well, they're not writing it, but so it comes down to the writer, and then how it gets changed for shooting and whatnot. And sometimes it's there. It depends on the nature of it. It's more, you know, because once it's shot. Yeah, it's not so much on the page. It should be, and there are writers that will write like that. You know, like I said, Stephen Moffat writes like that. Russell T Davies writes like that. He's very specific, actually, about, because it's his show that I'm working on right now, he's not only specific about how something should sound or how a place should sound as well, that creates an emotion like, you know, how cold is a place, but very specific about music that he wants to hear as well. And, you know, 9 times out of 10, he actually gets that piece of music, which is remarkable. So it really, in film, in my experience with film, it kind of evolves into during the cutting process, when the editor's putting it together, and then they're layering in their Avid, their temp effects. And so that's our guide to how they would like it to sound, as well as, you know, going along with the spotting session. The danger you run into is what we call guide trackitis, because they get so in love with what they've cut that it's hard for us to then present something that could be better. It might be the same. And so sometimes it's like, well, that wasn't how it was in the Avid. So then it's like unraveling it back, and, you know. So yeah, it depends on the project. Everyone's different.
I think I've got one last question before we open up to the audience. And I know your next films include Jurassic World and Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens, which I'm sure we saw the trailer to a couple of weekends ago. I think everyone did. I know it's very much very secretive, but is there anything you could tell us about what to expect at all? Are you allowed to give us anything, except for it's going to be amazing?
I can probably exclusively say that Jurassic will feature dinosaurs and a lot of screaming. Actually, the trailer for Jurassic, that was the first time I'd seen any footage, because there's obviously a lot of secrecy, so I won't even read the script or see anything until I get over there in February. But I was told there was going to be a lot of crowd, because I already knew that the park was open and whatnot, and I was actually kind of shocked to see the size of the crowds. So in terms of, because I'm doing dialogue and ADR on both films actually, it's kind of daunting the amount of loop group we're going to have to do for that. So that's interesting. That's good. As for Star Wars, because it's JJ, there'll be a lot of lens flare, but that's, you know, what everyone expects. And again, with that was the first time I'd seen anything. I'd spoken to the supervisor, Matt Wood. He'd been on set, and he's as big of a Star Wars fan as I am, if not bigger, and he was giddy with excitement. And when I saw the trailer, has everyone seen the trailer for the new Star Wars? There's a couple of shots that just took me back to childhood, with the X-Wing skimming along the water, and then that final typical JJ shot of the Falcon flying through. It's just going to be so much fun. I'm so excited.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, any questions?
No.
There must be. Yes.
It's lunchtime.
Over there. Oh, the gentleman over there. Slide.
Talk there, and a fantastic talk. What is the future then? Because I'm hearing, wow, you know, and it's just that a lot of the time. You know, what's it going to be in the future? Is it just going to be that even more?
Well, I hope not. And that's another reason I wanted to come back, because you know, I didn't want to just continually work on. God, it sounds really arrogant or pompous or whatever, but you know, I'm lucky to work on the films that I work on. But I just don't want to be doing another superhero movie or another, you know, big loud movie. They're fun, but I wanted to do more nicely written drama pieces. In terms of sound, I think it is a lot of directors just want to be, just make it louder, 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 louder. And you can only go so loud. You know, there are legal limits that you can go. In terms of the future of sound in cinema, Dolby Atmos, which is here now in this country. I think it is it?
Yes,
or it's coming.
A couple of theatres.
If no one's heard of Dolby Atmos, basically it adds a whole bunch of speakers both down the walls and in the ceiling. And I was very skeptical when I heard about this first, but where in normal theaters the sound, if it's going from front to back, it kind of goes in steps. I mean, it does sound like it's sweeping, but it is actually in steps. And what the Atmos matrix does is it makes it more organic and does actually sweep it through. And then the speakers in the ceiling, they're great for, you know, like jungles, or if there's a helicopter above you, then you can actually hear the blades as you would in real life. So I think that's where hopefully sound is going, and making it much more, what's the word, sophisticated rather than bombastic and rude, you know. Yeah, hopefully.
Thank you. Anyone else? We've got some over there in the middle, I think.
Hey, I'm just kind of expanding on what you're saying there, because I've got more of a music background, and you've probably heard of like the Loudness Wars, and with just limiting the shit out of everything.
Yeah.
Do you have the same problem with in the film industry? Like, do you have like a mastering stage?
Yes. After we've done the final mix, and we're looking at what the levels are, but when it comes to the print mastering stage. I think it's an average. You're allowed a certain decibel level as an overall average during the film. Sorry?
RMS.
Yes, exactly. But there are directors that are like, no, that should be louder. And it's like, well, we can't. You know, it's kind of as loud as you can go. So then you've got to find tricks, and that's what the mixers are good at, of making it sound louder without it actually being louder. And then that pleases the directors, you know.
Convincing them that you've done something to change it.
Yeah.
Well, I've done this to it, but, and
yeah, exactly. Well, there's that whole thing where the director will say, you know, can you make that sound a little better? And the mixer will just lean forward, not touch anything, lean back, play it again. He's like, yeah, that's it, brilliant, fantastic, love it. It hasn't changed a thing. So that's always good.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Next one.
Hi, I just wanted to know, what's your favourite bit of kit that you use on a daily basis?
Oh, well, it's Pro Tools. You know, thanks. When it comes down to all the plugins that are there, I don't really necessarily sit and read about what the latest plugin is, or what this does, or what the other one does. It comes down to, and maybe this comes from my background of actually physically handling tape, and it comes down to the edit. Because you can do a lot editing one single piece of sound and layering it with another piece without even processing it to create a brand new sound. And that's more fun than playing around with a plugin. I mean, don't get me wrong, I use plugins all the time. But I only use them when I need to use them. When usually, and especially with dialogue, it is just the editing tool, and that's Pro Tools. Yeah.
Is that no more time?